We should move
Absolutely.
on, Chewy, because we are going to talk about, tell me again, the bounce back, the earth, the ground. The earth
A
ground.
ground effect aircraft, and excitingly, an electric one.
Yeah, so we're going to talk to the CEO from Ocean Flyer. It's Shah Aslam joining us live as well. Shah, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Good evening, Pat and Chewy. How are you?
Yeah, I
Good,
think we're
mate.
doing all right. We're just talking about some not that this is not a serious conversation. I mean, who doesn't love the idea of electric planes? But that was I guess serious heavy. This feels like serious fun. But serious, interesting, amazing kind of fun. I think what we should probably do to start with is I want to bring up your website, just so people can kind of see what we're talking about. Now, tell us first of all, because one of the things that me and Chewy were talking about before we started the show was I read in one of the articles they were talking about the first prototype being on the water in America this week, but this looks like it's a prototype flying. Are there actually these planes, are they actually flying yet, or is this actually animation that's just looking amazing?
No, so that video that you just showed me, that's the actual prototype that was on the water.
Okay.
It's been on the water probably for the last couple of months now. They've been on the hull. It's been up on its foils. And the third test and the final test is to get it flying. In that video, what you see is it's just on the foils at this stage.
Gotcha. So basically, it's got the ferry aspect going quite well at the moment. We're just now seeing it moving into the aeroplane aspect.
Correct. So 2 out of the 3 elements, the key elements, have been hit.
Cool.
And the third one is being hit as we speak, and we should get some video footage of that in the next couple of months.
I'll put this on in the background as well. I don't think we need the sound for this because there is some more kind of footage about what we're all about, what you guys are all about with these planes and what they're going to be doing. I guess one of my questions is why? Why are you guys doing this? So for people who don't know, you're basically starting up an airline. It's going to be electric planes, as we're seeing here. This is obviously a rendering. It's going to be electric planes that are going to be flying around the coastal area, parts of the coastal areas of New Zealand. Why? Why are you doing this?
Well, look, there's a couple of reasons. So I actually started this, I guess the journey for me started about three and a half years ago when I took over Air Napier, regional airline based out of Napier. And the reason for us taking over Air Napier was because we always believed in New Zealand there was a real lack of connectivity between the regions and then some of the other key centers. If you look at some of the main airlines, most of them are focused out of Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and then into the regions. As we took over Air Napier, we're like, look, let's do something different. Let's connect the regions. And over the last 12 to 18 months, there's been a real push for sustainability. There's been a real push for environment. And we recognized that when we took over in 2018. The problem, however, was if you look at electric aircraft technology at the moment, we believe that in order to get mass scale electric aircraft into service, we're still probably about 8 to 10 years away. And that's purely because of the battery life, the battery technology that's out there. It needs to get the aircraft to climb up to 20, 25,000 feet. In the case of a sea glider, you only need to climb up to 10 meters above the surface of the water. So all of that battery life you can actually use in terms of getting a faster ride, getting more range, which electric aircraft can't do at this stage. So we reached out to Regent at the end of December last year. Within 6 weeks, we pretty much had an agreement signed up. And that was purely, we believed in the concept. We believed in the idea. We believed in Billy and his team, who's the CEO for Regent and the co-founder. And then the group of investors that were backing them, that gave us a lot of confidence.
Chewy, do you want to jump in? Because I've got heaps, but I don't want to take all the time.
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a plane nerd, I guess. And one of the things that this is reminiscent of, the Soviets had some very, very big aircraft back in the Cold War that used this same effect. But obviously they were using jet propulsion and that sort of thing. And then they never really went anywhere with it. This was something that was quite promising, and various groups have tried to use, and nothing ever happens with them. What do you think your chances are of this panning out?
Yeah, so the Caspian Sea monsters, as they were referred to back in the Soviet time, they made these massive things, which had 10 jet engines that you would see today on a 747 style engines. and they could carry 300 troops, they could carry tanks, they could fire missiles off it. So they were doing some pretty cool things with it. And those things at that stage, when they did do the test runs, and I think they had two built from what I remember, they were flying at about 450 miles an hour. But some of the key elements with them, or the key issues, were the turning radius. Number one, they required a large amount of space to turn because they were so huge. What these guys have done, and part of our confidence in sea gliders and the team at Regent, is they've taken a concept that did exist way back in the 1950s and 60s, when technology wasn't that advanced, and when these things were significantly larger than what they will be in this case. They've taken that concept and they've taken the technology of today, or of the next 3 years, which is the battery, the avionics, the electric motors, and they've kind of brought those two things together. So essentially, I'm not saying it's a new concept in terms of a sea glider. These things, you're absolutely right, they've been around, but that's what gives us confidence that these guys can actually commercialize it. And then the testing we saw out of Tampa, it being on its hull, it foiling, that's already a significant development if you think about it, because even on its foiled, the full-scale model, it will be flying at speeds of about 40 or 50 knots. So it's already, even at the foil level, it's significantly faster than its counterparts, being the ferries or the boats. Now, the next step and the last step, which they're working on, which they've gotten to, which is the flying aspect, once they can get this off the water and 10 meters above the surface, we're looking at speeds of 300 kilometers an hour. With the avionics they have in there, which they didn't have in the 1960s and the 70s, the autopilot, which will allow for a smoother flight, better collision avoidance systems, better gauge of the weather 5-10 miles ahead. All of that technology significantly helps bring this to life.
Nice. I was there thinking about this, and obviously I'll just bring up the screen again. I'm not going to play the video, but the animation that News Hub put out showed Wellington to Christchurch. I think it showed Wellington to Blenheim. It showed Auckland City to Waiheke Island. I don't know if this is a stupid question or not, because obviously you need to take off and land in water, but can you cross land as well, or do you have to stay above the water the whole time? So like for us in Dunedin, if we had something that went Dunedin to Queenstown, that'd be amazing. But that obviously has to go across land. Dunedin to Christchurch, great. It can be across all the water the whole way. But what about like Lake Taupo to Auckland, Dunedin to Queenstown? Can it go, because it doesn't fly as high, can it go across land as well?
So there's a couple of, it's a good question actually. There's a couple of things there. Number one, wing and ground effect doesn't have to just be above water. It can be above any surface as long as the surface is smooth and plain. The problem that will come in flying this, let's say from Dunedin to Queenstown, will be, number one, you won't be able to keep it at 10, 20 meters above the surface of the ground because there's obstacles. So the moment this thing kind of goes beyond 30 to 40 meters, you're losing that wing and ground effect, which means you then start behaving as a conventional aircraft. This thing has the capability to behave as a conventional aircraft, but what happens in that case is then the amount of battery required means that you won't be able to go a long distance.
Right.
So that's the first reason. And the second reason is the moment we start flying this sea glider above ground, then you also go from a regulatory point of view, you leave maritime and you get into the sea air land as well.
Gotcha.
These things primarily and principally will be regulated by Maritime New Zealand. We've had conversations with Maritime New Zealand. CA in New Zealand may play a supporting role in terms of the avionics, and because it will be doing flight, which will behave like aircraft. But the main regulator is Maritime New Zealand.
What about the idea, you just mentioned the words smooth and plain. It's got to be flying above a surface that's smooth and plain. Ben has asked this question, but I also had it queued up to ask as well. For example, the weather for this weekend looks atrocious. Dangerous waves, severe gales, rain and snow. I think I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, that also the long-term projections of this might be to fly to Australia. Now, in the Tasman Sea, there can be 10, 20, 30 meter waves. How does these planes operate when it's not smooth and plain, especially in the water, when there's big waves, even when there's rough waves? What does that do to how they function?
So the 10-meter length, actually, it's mathematically calculated. The wing and ground effect essentially states that as long as the vehicle or the sea glider in this case is within 1.5 wingspan lengths above the surface of the water, still in ground effect. So when we talk about Australia, for example, we're not talking about the smaller Viceroys that will be used for trans-Tasman routes. It'll be the larger Monarchs, and their wingspan will be significantly larger. So, those things will be flying wing and ground effect at probably about 100, 110 meters, around that approximate at this stage. So when you talk about 20-meter or 10-meter swells, there should be no issues there.
Gotcha.
In terms of the Viceroys functioning within New Zealand, look, we've never said that these will operate in all weather conditions, just like any other transport, be it a ferry, be it a cruise ship, be it an airplane, be it a train. There will be some restrictions to weather. But in terms of the waves and stuff, the autopilot and the weather radars will ensure that between that 10 and 30-meter altitudes above the surface of the water, depending on what the waves are doing, at all times it will average out the waves and it will maintain that kind of height above the water. And if the waves do start to get rough in the middle of the flight, the autopilot will automatically adjust the height. So it'll raise it, let's say, another 5 or 10 meters, or it'll bring it down another 5 or 10 meters if it needs to.
Nice.
And that's where the foils come in handy as well. So the beauty of this thing is, you can either be on the hull, which means you're going at about 5 or 10 knots. You can be on the foils where you're going at about 40 or 50 knots, or you could be flying where you're going at about 180 knots. And the transition between all three modes, you can make at any time. So you could be out in the open water. One of the questions we received down from close to Dunedin was tourist flights. The idea there being, look, you can get, tourists on, you can do some scenic flights, you can go out into open waters. And if you needed to land and park this for a couple of minutes, just for people to take in the scenery and whatnot, that is possible. You can actually do that in open waters as well. So it could be traveling on any three modes at any time. And that's the other beauty of it.
I think it's remarkable that electric technology has come that far. And it's an interesting concept of, reducing one of the concerns about electricity as a mode of transport is getting that extra efficiency from ground effect. It'll be really interesting to see how this progresses.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Hey,
look, sorry.
So I was going to say, Shah, not to belabor the point again, but I'm interested in the investment and the cost that this is going to be, because I would think if you're flying Wellington to Christchurch, there's a terminal at one end, there's a terminal at the other end, there's the plane or planes, or the whatever the correct terminology is, the flyers going between them. What's the cost? Let's say you're doing your first 4 runs, which you listed as 3 runs, wasn't it? Waiheke, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Wellington, Blenheim. To get to that stage, operating as a commercial, even though it's maritime, do we call you an airline? Is that the correct word?
Yeah, look, you can
okay.
You can definitely call us an airline.
As a commercial airline, what kind of dollar figure are you needing to set up those first 3 routes?
Look, the total investment, as we've said, is $700 million, which gets us the 25 sea gliders. We will start receiving 5 sea gliders a year. So, if you take that 5 sea gliders, the first 3 routes that you talk about, we can launch with an investment of close to about $100 million. And that's the first step. And then as we get delivery for the next 5 and the following 5, we raise more investment and get the delivery across. One of the things and one of the questions I've been asked quite a bit, and I'd just like to, use this medium or through you guys just to clarify as well.
Sure.
When we say that, Wellington to Christchurch is $60, people have said, look, $700 million, how are you going to do it at $60?
Exactly.
Where's the business case? The reality is, if you compare this to an airline, and we've looked at options of similar sized aircraft, if we were to run them on regional routes or same routes, 2 main things where the airline outstrips a sea glider in terms of costs at this stage is maintenance and fuel. And those form a significant part of any airline operation. If you're looking at fuel costs, you can be anywhere from 20 to 25% of total operating expense across a year. It's fuel. And then maintenance, if you look at maintenance, another probably 25 to 35, 45% of maintenance. And that varies based on the age of the aircraft. So when we talk about regional fleet, we went out to explore, let's get a regional fleet. There is actually nothing that the larger aircraft manufacturers or even the mid-sized aircraft manufacturers are making which services the regional towns of New Zealand. The ideal fleet, in my opinion, for regional New Zealand would be about the 20 to 25 seater aircraft. Now, the smallest brand new aircraft that's being made at that commercial level, you're looking at about 50 seats. That's not viable or economical to run between Dunedin in Invercargill or Dunedin and Queenstown or Napier and Gisborne 5 times a day. That's, you're doing one flight in the morning, one in the evening, and that defeats the purpose. Then we went down and looked at aircraft in the market that are available that other airlines or regional players have used. Those are probably about 20 to 22 years old. And that's where the maintenance cost significantly goes up,
Gotcha.
The older they get. So when we look at the Sea Gliders, yes, the initial investment is expensive, but not wanting to share the numbers at this stage because they're slightly confidential. But if you look at the individual vessels, they're actually not more expensive than the aircraft in the same class.
And so you're saying you're going to get it on the back end. I guess that comes down to the idea that you still need patronage. I mean, I know that it's not quite as black and white as what I'm just saying, but $100 million at $60 a seat's 1.7 million tickets. So that's a lot of patronage for you to get there. Yeah. And I don't know, Chewy, I don't know if you mentioned them before, but this has been tried before, not with in the maritime situation, but there was a little airline called Kiwi Air that tried to do kind of routes of the South Island that because they weren't serviced, like Dunedin, Invercargill, Nelson, that sort of thing, didn't have the patronage. So look, I think competition is always good, and I wish you all the best. I'm very excited to continue to see what you're going to do. I look forward to you including a Dunedin Christchurch route in there as well, so we can get up and see it when the Highlanders beat the Crusaders every other time. But it's been great. Look, Chewy, you want to wrap with anything else before we let Shah go?
No, I think I've covered all of my questions. It's very convincing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's lots of people interested in the chat about it as well. So we will leave it for there, Shah. And look, I mean, we'd love to have you back again as this process goes on. Find out where you're at now, where you're going to as well, because it's sort of what we do. We just talk about the interesting news stories of the day, and this is certainly one of the interesting news stories of the day. So thank you so much for joining us.
No, I appreciate it. And look, I'd just like to, if I could end with a couple of statements. I think from our perspective, the key here is one of the main targets: how do we get New Zealand to 2050 carbon neutral? And while it's great to see some of the initiatives that are taking place in terms of electric vehicles and sustainable coffee cups and whatnot, I think there needs to be larger efforts that need to be made. And with the larger efforts will come risks as well. Nothing is risk-free. I've personally committed to this. I've taken a risk, but I believe it's a calculated risk. And when we went to Miami and Tampa about 4 weeks ago to announce the launch and visit their research and development center, I think a lot of that confidence that I had in these guys was reassured by seeing them in action, by seeing what they were doing, by seeing the developments they've made in their prototype. And, they've already started working on the full-scale prototype as well on bits and pieces like the wings and the tail side of things. So there's significant, movement that's taking place out of the States on this. And, we're pretty confident that we can get these across to New Zealand and hopefully contribute to the 2050, carbon neutral targets and also run a sustainable business through these things.
Yeah, out of interest.
Yeah.
Out of interest, what's your daily driver, Shah? What's your daily vehicle?
What's my daily vehicle at the moment?
Yeah.
Mostly, I'm a bit on a health kick at the moment, so mostly cycling.
Nice.
But on the longer routes, it's a mixture of a Toyota, which is a conventional vehicle, so it's not electric at this stage. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
And when I do get the opportunity, it is an electric vehicle.
Excellent. And your electric vehicle of choice is what? What did you get? What have you got?
Well, I would have preferred to, gone in the Tesla, but, delivery timelines are 9 to 12 months out. So anywhere from, I think the last one I used was Leaf.
Nissan.
The Nissan Leaf, yeah. So that was the last one I used. That was not bad. That was pretty nice. And I've also had the pleasure of driving a couple of the Hyundai ones. They were pretty nice as well.
Cool. Hey, Shah, thanks so much for joining us. People can see the Ocean Flyer website going there in the background. It's been a great pleasure. And whenever it happens and whenever we continue to move forward with what you're trying to do, I look forward to talking to you again and finding out what's next.
Absolutely. Look, thank you very much for your time. Have a pleasant evening.
No, it was fun. Thanks, dude. Appreciate it.